Okay, let me ask you a question right at the top and just, be honest with yourself. When was the last time you felt truly uncomfortable, but in a way that signaled a positive, necessary change? I'm not talking about the daily stuff, the wrong coffee order or, a bad day at work. I mean, that really distinct heart racing feeling you get just before you step over a line and do something you know is good for you, but it's terrifying in the moment.
That heart racing moment is exactly what we're going to dig into today. We want to understand not just that the comfort zone is a thing, but why it feels so safe and why it quietly starts to shrink our lives.
Yeah, and how we can actually bridge that gap between just being comfortable and, feeling fulfilled. So if you're feeling stuck or maybe just restless, or you find yourself wondering, is this is this really it for the next 20 years? I want to go beyond the motivational posters and unpack exactly why those familiar routines eventually start to feel, well, suffocating. We're really looking at the psychological infrastructure of stagnation.
Mhm.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The central conflict that it's rarely obvious. I mean, it's not some dramatic choice between stability and total disaster. The real choice is between predictable comfort on one hand and potential fulfillment on the other. Material really emphasizes that the comfort zone, it feels like a known quantity, right? It's a reliable shelter, but it's a shelter that just silently and steadily suffocates our ambitions.
And we should probably challenge an assumption right away. The idea that living in your comfort zone is the same as being lazy. That's usually the first story we tell ourselves, right? I'm just lazy or I don't have enough willpower.
Exactly, and that's precisely what it is against. It's not a moral failing at all. It's a biological imperative. Your comfort zone, at its root, is just a mechanism your brain built for protection. It relies completely on familiar routines and, predictable outcomes because, neurologically speaking, predictability equals survival. It saves energy.
Right. Our brains evolved to minimize risk, to minimize effort. So the known path is always the lowest energy, safest path.
Totally.
So the comfort zone itself isn't inherently bad. It's a tool, really. It lets us navigate the basics, driving, washing dishes, stuff like that, without a ton of mental effort every time. It frees up our processing power for bigger things. But here's the critical shift the authors focus on.
Hmm.
The problem isn't that a comfort zone exists. The disaster is living there permanently.
And that permanent residency, it leads to a really fascinating and honestly a kind of scary consequence that's described in the text. If you never leave that zone of predictability, you just stop learning. You stop taking risks that force you to adapt, and fundamentally, you stop believing in your own capacity for growth.
So the scary part isn't a crisis. It's not a big dramatic failure.
No, it's a quiet, slow motion numbness. It's a kind of psychological atrophy.
It's like a muscle you just stop using. It doesn't vanish overnight, but gradually its capacity just shrinks. And the sources say this leads to a feeling of suffocation that starts really quietly. You might even mistake it for just being tired.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that quiet numbness, it eventually hardens into regret, which takes us right into the emotional cost, that very distinct disappointment that comes from playing it too safe for too long.
Whole idea in these really relatable anecdotes. It describes having what looks like a great life on the outside, a stable job, a predictable routine, you're financially secure. There's one excerpt about a professional who had all the trappings of success, the promotion, the nice house, the whole bit.
And yet they felt like they were, and this is a quote, watching their own life instead of living it.
Hmm.
That one just hits so hard because it captures the passive nature of comfortable stagnation. It wasn't that life was bad, it was just prescripted, and they felt like they were just sitting in the audience.
And that passivity, it creates this heavy, very specific emotional weight. The source isolates one key feeling, that heavy sense of disappointment that would just reliably show up every single Sunday night.
That is incredibly specific detail, isn't it? It's so memorable. It wasn't the usual dread of Monday morning meetings. It was a profound, sinking feeling of regret for the opportunities they hadn't taken that week or that year. It's the emotional echo of that lie comfort whispers to us, don't risk what you have for what you might lose.
And if we connect that disappointment to the bigger picture, this is where fear comes in, but it's totally disguised as mature, rational logic. Staying in the comfort zone, even when it's painful, gets rationalized as being responsible or being practical.
The authors call it fear wearing a suit and tie.
Huh, that's good.
It's a perfect description. The internal monologue is so convincing. I can't start that business. I have a mortgage. I can't leave this job. I have benefits. And look, these are practical concerns, of course, but they're so often used as armor to prevent the vulnerability that you need for growth.
What I found really powerful was the distinction the source made between fearing failure and fearing judgment. One of the contributors shared that they kept turning down public speaking gigs, not because they were afraid of getting the content wrong, but because they didn't want to be seen trying and possibly failing in front of other people.
And that, right there, is the core realization that unlocks this whole dilemma. We often aren't afraid of the setback itself. We're afraid of the judgment, of the embarrassment, of having to admit we started badly.
Right.
Because real, visible growth, it requires visibility. The source makes it so clear that staying small is often just a defense mechanism against what other people might think.
You just can't grow quietly forever. I mean, at some point, you have to risk being seen, starting badly, making mistakes, and learning out in the open. And that's the catalyst. Whether the change comes from burnout or just that creeping feeling that you are so overdue for a new challenge.
Which brings us to this crucial psychological shift. The source states it so emphatically. Growth doesn't ask for confidence. It asks for courage.
We use those words almost interchangeably, but the book separates them completely. Why is that distinction so important?
It's crucial because confidence is always built after the fact. It's the proof of past success. It's that feeling you get when you know you can do something because you've done it. Courage, though, is the prerequisite. It's the action you take while you still feel completely unprepared. The source material even notes that physically when you use courage, your heart rate is up, your palms might be sweating, but you choose to step forward anyway. Confidence is just the eventual absence of all those symptoms.
That distinction really reframes the whole process. If you're waiting for confidence before you start something new, you're just waiting for proof that you can't possibly generate without taking action first.
Exactly. And this reinforces why growth should feel uncomfortable. If a new project or a new goal doesn't trigger that little internal tremor, you are very likely just repeating a skill you've already mastered. The needle isn't moving.
Discomfort is the data point.
It's the essential data point.
But if we know the old identity, the old story, is maybe boring or unfulfilling, why is it so powerful? Why does our brain fight so hard to keep it?
That's an excellent question. The resistance, it comes from the fundamental preference our brain has for certainty over potential reward. Discomfort signals that you're acquiring new skills, stepping into new roles, and building a new version of yourself. And this new identity, it poses a direct threat to the old story of who you are.
The moment you try to change a habit or take a risk, that old story, that internal narrative we all have, it just screams at you, wait, that's not who we are. We don't do things like that. Stick to the playbook.
The brain defaults to the status quo, even if the status quo is mediocre, simply because it's predictable. This new identity threatens that entire sister of known outcomes. So the really deep, provocative question that growth asks, according to the source, is this. Who are you willing to become, even if it costs who you used to be? That loss of the familiar, safe identity is what really causes all that internal friction we call fear.
This gives us a great foundation psychologically, but now we need the actionable steps. And the good news from the sources is that stepping out of the comfort zone doesn't require some dramatic life-altering event. You don't have to sell all your possessions or move across the world tomorrow.
No.
It just requires intentional, small steps, things designed to break that predictability.
Precisely. The goal isn't immediate, massive change. The goal is to build the courage muscle through consistent, low-stakes discomfort. And the source material gave 3 incredibly practical, easy-to-implement steps for this. These are the small nudges that really compound over time.
Okay, let's spend some time on these because our audience is always looking for the how. What's the first small step we can take, say, this week?
The first one is, do one thing a week that scares you just a little. And the just a little part is really key. It can't be paralyzing, but it has to be something that makes your internal voice start arguing with you. The source gives great examples. Emailing an executive you admire and asking for 10 minutes of their time, or speaking up in a meeting when you usually stay quiet, maybe trying a new physical activity where you know you'll look foolish at first.
So the small act is basically a controlled exposure therapy for fear. It's teaching your system that the fear response is often way out of proportion to the actual danger.
Exactly. You are decoupling the feeling of anxiety from the actual outcome. And that accumulated evidence that, hey, the world didn't end, that's what builds confidence. It makes the next slightly scary thing just a little bit easier.
Okay, and what's the second practical step they detail?
The second one is, say yes before you feel ready. This is designed specifically to counter that fear of judgment and the perfectionism we talked about. The sources describe this phenomenon of waiting for perfect knowledge. It never comes. So saying yes, whether it's volunteering to lead a small project or accepting an invitation you're nervous about, it forces you into a situation where you just have to engage and figure it out.
That seems like the hardest one for people who are, meticulous planners. They want the blueprint before they pour the foundation.
And that's exactly why this step is so effective. It requires you to trust that your own capacity for problem solving is enough, even without a perfect plan. It teaches you that competency often follows commitment, not the other way around. You commit, and then your brain finds a way.
And the third step, that one focuses on breaking the routine itself, which makes total sense because the comfort zone thrives on patterns.
Yes. The third step is simply change your routine. The core insight here is that new routes create new thoughts. If you take the exact same path to work, eat the same lunch, read the same websites every single day, your brain is just on autopilot. It's running in an efficient, well-worn groove.
You're not requiring any new neurological pathways to fire.
Precisely. So by forcing yourself to take a new commute, or sit in a different spot in the coffee shop, or even read news from a source you'd normally never look at, you force your brain to notice new things. This intentional disruption breaks predictability, and it conditions your brain to handle novelty, which is the foundational skill for all growth.
And the authors also stress how important reflection is when you're applying these steps.
It's crucial. You have to regularly stop and just interrupt that autopilot cycle to ask yourself one simple question. Am I choosing comfort or am I choosing growth? That simple assessment immediately puts you back in the driver's seat. It reestablishes intentionality.
So let's connect the dots here on how these small steps lead to something bigger. The compounding effect is the real magic. Small discomfort today becomes real. Earned confidence tomorrow. You don't just jump from being paralyzed to being confident. You earn it through all these accumulated moments of small courage.
That is the ultimate takeaway from these sources. You are exchanging instant gratification for a delayed but much more durable fulfillment. Comfort feels good now, right now, because it satisfies the brain's need for safety, but growth feels good later because it satisfies the soul's need for challenge and for meaning.
And later lasts longer.
So reflect on this for a moment. Think about one specific area of your life. It could be professional, relational, a skill you've wanted to learn, where you've been consistently playing it safe. Not because you actually believe it's the best option, but just because it's familiar.
What's the one small intentional step you'll take this week toward growth? Is it doing one thing that scares you just a little, saying yes to something? So what does this all mean? I think it means that true safety isn't found in avoiding risk and staying small. It's found in knowing you have the capacity built through intentional discomfort to handle whatever new challenges come your way, and that capacity is built one uncomfortable step at a time.